So, first story of the week is all about Bethesda coming out and sharing that they have delayed Starfield and Redfall. Not Refall, Redfall. So that's also going to be a real wild conversation for, I think, the rest of this year. I think it's going to be something that we're talking about. I think the internet has been really loud about what this is going to wind up doing for the future of 2022 in terms of games we get a chance to play on the Xbox platform, in terms of conversations we're going to be digging into about, what should we have expectations for? Are folks super disappointed? I think we all are very disappointed at the fact that this game is not going to be coming out when they said it was going to be coming out. But it also changes a lot of the expectations for the upcoming showcase that Xbox is going to be putting on in a month or about a month from now. Bethesda shared, they said, we have made a decision to delay the launches of Redfall and Starfield for the first half of 2023. We're going to be moving it basically to Q1 of next year. The teams Arcane, Austin, and Redfall, Bethesda have been incredibly ambitious about the games, and they want that to be received in the best way possible. We're sorry. We know that this energy is going to not be great, but also we want to make sure that the game shows themselves in the best form or fashion. I saw a lot of scuttlebutt on Twitter yesterday when all of this stuff kind of popped up in the news. And to a certain extent, I'm not surprised. I think, again, a running theme through all of these conversations that have happened over the past couple of years, especially in the COVID era, has been how much has COVID really delayed and stunted development because of people not being able to have a lot of that work that happens, in a studio, when you're peeking over someone's shoulder and being like, hey, let's get into a room and talk about this. Or, how do you kind of build that conversation out into a much larger, how are we all working together kind of deal? I think it winds up changing a lot of the scope that people foresaw. And then when things don't necessarily hit the mark, what do? Do you keep going? Where Bethesda, let's be honest, there is very little room for mistakes for Bethesda with this game. I feel like for Xbox at this point, for Microsoft at this point, the conversation is not changing in a huge way, but I do think it is now a thing of, you've went out and bought all these studios, you've went out and you've acquired all these teams to give your platform the best chance to fight the competition in Sony and Nintendo. And now two of your biggest tentpole games are going to get delayed. And that feels like a problem for a lot of folks who are in the space, right? I think for players, I think, there's a lot of disappointment in that layer. And I think a lot of folks are worried about the current state of Xbox if you're an Xbox fan. While I think Sony ponies are really, they're like, yeah, we told you so. So what else did you expect for this to be able to happen? It changes a lot of conversations in terms of like, how far out now does the move happen where games that we talked about in terms of being, having in a launch date, how do launch dates even matter at this point? Because we know most things are going to get delayed. Does it matter to showcase that stuff? Or now, does the marketing play wind up becoming, we tell you a thing is happening, we tell you a thing is in development, and then we literally go dark until 6 months out when you have a thing to be able to show? Or do you kind of continue to do this, but you signal out earlier, or do you tell folks that things are happening and you dribble out more conversations when things are being able to be shown, but you don't give the actual launch date until you absolutely know it's locked in, and basically in certification to be able to tell people like it's coming at day and date and it's not moving, right? It'll be really wild to see what that conversation changes to with now this being one of the biggest games that is not coming in this holiday season, but is going to be coming soon, how does that also kind of maneuver and change the conversation for a lot of folks within the space around that? It's just hard to balance out expectations, and it's hard to balance out, what people are kind of needing to feel around hype and how that hype winds up getting kind of squashed when you have a delay, when you're trying to do the right thing. Like, I think you're always, as a company, trying to build hype. You're always trying to figure out good ways to, get your audience really excited about what is coming down the pipe, especially when you're moving into now what is the current gen of consoles. But then when they were talking about Starfield and Redfall, it was that thing that was kind of like, here's what we want you to know so that you can be excited for the next generation of consoles, which is now our current gen. A couple of things popped into my mind as well. So I think Bethesda and Microsoft did a really good job of tempering expectations now, giving people a good understanding of what's supposed to be coming and the time frames and all that kind of stuff. It does change what the expectations were for the showcase. I think the showcase now loses a bunch of steam in terms of what games we thought were going to be in that mix and now what we know won't be. So I think that's one issue there for them to think about. And also then what takes the place of a game like Starfield for 2022? What takes place for a game like Redfall, which I don't think was going to be this year. I don't think it was. But Bethesda and Starfield was the game this season that everyone was looking forward to. We are already kind of past the Elden Ring fervor that was in that space, which is well deserved, which is now definitely locked in for Game of the Year at this point. But what moves into that slot? It's not going to be Gotham Knights, not really. Them talking about moving away from old gen was smart, but that also truncates down the pool in which you'll see a lot of conversations happen. I don't know what other game is going to be in the mix for that. I don't know what other game is going to take a spot that big that people are going to care about, that is going to be almost done, that can actually be in that slot. So that's going to be a huge deal for them in a lot of different ways. I don't know how they fix that for the upcoming holiday season. And the other layer of that I was thinking a lot about was, do these announcements of delays wind up putting a lot more pressure on other studios who have games that are potentially coming out this season that I think everybody now at this point are like, that's going to get delayed. Whatever game that was, that's going to get delayed. So I wonder if it, puts a lot of pressure on other studios to keep their date. Two, I wonder if it adds a layer of pressure to any studio that's like, man, we think this is probably going to get delayed. So when should we say it? Should we say it as soon as someone else says it that has a big game out in the mix, so that some of that energy gets dispersed amongst all of those crowds? Like, you want to tell everybody bad news all at the same time so you can get over it faster. I wonder if that's a thing that people are doing. And when I'm saying all of this, I'm saying all of this with a wink to God of War Ragnarok, which I think is probably going to get delayed. I don't think that game is going to come out this year. It'll probably, in my mind, definitely be a game that winds up getting pushed to 2023. Excuse me. But I think it's going to be one of those things where if it is, and it winds up getting delayed, that then turns that conversation really interestingly back to Sony and PlayStation to say, you also are kind of sparse when it comes to big mega games that we have an expectation to drop for this holiday season. So then you have Sony and Microsoft both being like, well, we had a lot of stuff that's going to drop, and that's going to be really interesting that it doesn't, and it gets moved to Q1 or Q2 of 2023. The other layer of that I was thinking about the other night that is actually not a great position is, so if God of War doesn't come out this year, in my mind, the next biggest game for them to try to have to promote is Hogwarts Legacy, which also is not a great look for the brand, especially if you think about all the energy that is revolving around J.K. Rowling and, you know, all the Harry Potter layers there. Even within the space that was just there for the, you know, a lot of industry folks, there was so much bad vibes around that game and what that game represents and a lot of the stuff that's there, even though from a player perspective, lots of folks who were watching those streams around Hogwarts were actually really excited for it. I wonder if that then becomes the game of 2022 for them. And it makes me wonder, how are they going to navigate that space when that potentially is the biggest game for them of this year and of this season, that they have to massage the messaging around, you know, a game that is tied to someone that is transphobic. That's going to be really interesting to see how they balance that out in that conversation, because that's not a thing that I think anyone who is working in Sony PR is going to want to have to deal with. That is going to be a problem child that they have to figure out. I think they did a decent job of it with the last conversation, but I do think that that puts them in a kind of crappy situation, because they're going to get nothing but crap from the press. They're going to get nothing but crap from whoever decides that wants to play it and they want to promote it alongside of it. Like, if you're a content creator, how do you talk about that game in a way that's going to feel good for your audience, unless your audience is already transphobic and you're just like digging into the grossness, even though that game looks dope? Like, we talked about it in a couple episodes before of saying, can you cover this thing in a way that feels good as a content creator? I think you can, but I think it's going to be really hard for everyone who's going to be in that mix to have to deal with that. So that's going to be a wild thing to see for the rest of this year. I think Microsoft has a lot of confidence in the platform, doing a lot more stuff with cloud and with Game Pass, but it's going to be really hard for them to really boost the energy for the rest of this year, knowing that that game is not going to be in the mix for them. So another thing that came out today was really interesting. So the folks over at Activision Blizzard put out this blog post that was around this tool that they've been building to kind of help talk about diversity and inclusion within the way that they're building games across not only their studio, but across the kind of family of studios that are in that mix for them. And they put out this conversation around this tool that they're pulling all these different segments and pieces together of how they're thinking about diversity, how they've gotten information that has helped to kind of inform them from DEI consultants. And they put out this piece that didn't land well at all with the audience. And I think, you know, they talked about it in their blog. They said they want to see themselves represented in games. They said, we want to see ourselves represented in games. We want to see the barriers that, you know, drop that access lowered. We have done some work here with this tool and this method that they're using to guard against unconscious bias and exclusion with the game characters that they've made and the worlds that they are making. So they pulled in some folks from MIT Game Lab along this organization called King, or I don't think it's King the developer, or maybe it is a King the developer, I'm not sure, which basically turned and made some software that would create and monitor guidelines for character conception and creation, looking at all the ways that basic elements such as gender, body type, roles, heroes versus villains, and such other granular factors such as pose and body movement can suggest powerful things about a character one way or another. And it says, according to King, globalization project manager Jacqueline Chomadas, once MIT handed over the basic software, the team at King spent the last few years honing and developing it, and mostly as a volunteer effort. They were kind of putting this together for folks to be able to use this. It says people were spending their off hours working on the tool simply because they believed it had so much potential. It says, how does it work? Which I think is actually really interesting. So the idea of the tool to make characters more diverse and inclusive may seem a little hard to wrap your head around. No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. The idea of a tool can be useful. It's a matter of how you use that tool, how you craft that tool. But it has to be more than just, say, a pop-up reminder that between 2017 and 2021, nearly 80% of the highest-selling games in the world featured white male protagonists, according to a study conducted by Diamond Lobby. It says it needs to be more of a part of the incubation process from the start, baking into the pipeline as an unmissable consistency step that is missed often in the development process. So I want to stop there for a second, because I think one of the things, because it's a lot of breaking down of how this is supposed to kind of help within the conversation about making characters more diverse and making the process of diversity and inclusion more incorporated within the product pipeline. When I was working over at Riot, I think one of the interesting layers of all of this, because I was working in the DEI team, and one of the things that we consistently, the drum that we beat was, how do you get people who understand diversity and inclusion, people who are from underrepresented groups, people who are within the space, to constantly and continuously be a part of the conversation when oftentimes diversity and inclusion comes in at the kind of tail end of production, right? That's the thing that we want to move away from. It's something that we want to kind of guard against in that process. And we're starting to do a lot of that with the teams that we worked on, and building those teams and building those conversations about, like, how do you pull in folks early on into that process to do that thing. And the spider chart that you see kind of represented here on this screen is a thing that they're touting as a thing to kind of give a visualization of how the conversation, how you scale a thing, and how do you talk about building the tool so that it gives developers and folks who are thinking about the creation process better ways to think about, does this meet the mark of what we think diversity and inclusion is? That's where I think the biggest failing of this potential tool can be. And I think the reason that that winds up kind of failing is because then you categorize things that don't really lean into exactly what diversity and inclusion needs to be, nor does it represent data well for the folks who are at home who are looking at this as like, okay, so you got a 3 in ethnicity, you got a 2 in culture. Like, what does that even mean when it comes to the process of thinking about what the actual underlying foundation of what diversity and inclusion means? Is you need more visibility. You need the stories and the characters to be authentic to the places and the cultures that they represent. And how do you build that into the pipeline again so that you don't have characters that come out into the world and folks who are within those spaces look at that and they say, this is inauthentic to what I understand our culture to be. And I think when you break things down in this algorithmic way where you're like, all right, so you get a 4 on style, or you get, you know, oh, your culture is Egyptian and you're from an Arab space. So how do we build that into the equation of what, again, we want to kind of represent moving out into the world and have those characters, again, feel like they are authentic? I just don't think that this is the way to do it. And I think what you wind up getting with a tool like this, even though the ideas are based in a want to make the space better, it makes things granular in a way that actually strips away diversity in ways that we need them to be. The things that make up culture all touch. If you really wanted to make this a usable chart in a way that I think would make sense, it's really a bunch of Venn diagrams. It's a bunch of circles that touch and they overlap with different pieces of what culture means and what culture makes for folks who are living within it. It is a really weird space to be able to be like, well, yeah, I like what YG says in our chat. Says this is a weird model, especially after hearing people's critiques of Lucio's hair. Like, yeah, like if we put in faux dreads for a character who is Brazilian, does that connect and give you more points for diversity or less points for diversity? Or does it say we're giving more diversity points because we put in a ethnic hairstyle, but we put it on a character that wouldn't necessarily wear dreads? It doesn't lean into the things that make those conversations more important. And it also doesn't represent the way that I would hope for diversity conversations to land. What this feels like is we want our teams to not feel burdened by doing the work that it takes. So we will do this algorithmic version of it and throw a bunch of formulas into this that will spit out an idea of saying, all right, these fit these modes of what we think diversity to be, and therefore this character is diverse. I don't think that that's what you need here. I think this is what you do when you're trying to hit KPIs towards diversity and not get you actual diversity. You can't do diversity through osmosis. You can't showcase diversity really well in a spider chart. I hate spider charts because I think they just don't really give you good visuals on what you're trying to showcase. But at worst, what it does is it tries to dumb down the work that winds up happening through consultancy, through having really smart people work in your team who can voice some of this stuff to folks who may not necessarily be, or to the folks that are the decision makers when it comes to these processes of making games. And it also really kind of like moves this conversation into this weird analytical space where I think Austin Walker had a really great tweet today. And his tweet is exactly kind of what I think it leans into. Austin Walker says, I can't speak to any of the particular people involved in this instance, but I have heard stories about this for years from artists, writers, consultants, and DEI folks. Just a constant fight against, we're successful without X, prove why we need Y, and show us the data. Absolutely have heard that conversation in the mix within a couple of spaces that I've occupied within that space. And again, I think what it does is the space is constantly asking for diversity and inclusion to prove itself. It is constantly asking diversity and inclusion to tell us why it is important, as opposed to saying it is always important. It has always been important. It is just now that you are finding out that you have an audience that gives a shit about it. And I think that's the part where we wind up landing here, where you wind up doing it as a disservice to the folks who are actually living it, to the audience that you are constantly missing by not thinking about this in the forefront of your mind, as opposed to a thing that we have to add in and sprinkle in, you know, during the development cycle. I think that's where you wind up missing the point. And I think Austin's tweet directly speaks to that beautifully in a way that just nails that part of the conversation in a real way. I think, you know, we see it across many companies that are trying to get it in and do it well. The weird thing about this also is that to a certain extent, games like Overwatch have done some of this kind of well, but also they've missed some of the pieces there. So this tool also feels like a weird, like, second guessing of some of the work that they've done well. Like, I would say Riot has done a really good job in terms of the character diversity that you've seen in a game like Valorant, where I know from personal experience that there are a lot of folks that are talking to those teams directly. There are a lot of folks that are in their diversity and inclusion groups. That's not the word that I want to use. In their affinity groups that are working directly on these teams and informing them of when they're having missteps, or when the process comes down to add a new hero. It is how they are informing a lot of the process to make that work better for the teams. And then you get really good products in the world in Valorant. I think, again, I think tools are tools. I think there are biases already built into many of these tools by the folks who are usually the decision makers, who are the ones building it. And I don't want to shit on the tool in and of itself. I just think that, one, this was a thing that never should have gotten out into the public. there are some things that are out there for public consumption, and I think that there are some things that are within that space that you use as things to drive different activations and ways that you want your work to work. But the space is always this mix of, you know, we want to do D&I in the right way, but we think about it in a quota perspective and a KPI perspective. We also don't want to over-index our talent by making them do work that they don't need to be doing. You should be able to come to work and just do your job and not be asked to be a DEI consultant. You shouldn't. That shouldn't be a part of your scope unless you are asking for that to be a part of your scope. If you want to take on those layers in your job, you want to raise your hand and be like, I want to be a part of that process to make sure we get it right as a game that is going to represent me as a worker for your company. I think that that's fine. But we wind up seeing that that's not the case in the way it works usually. And you also have the space where you're trying to figure out the good ways to share things like this publicly while also not getting your face eaten by the internet. The internet, as you can see right now, as I'm watching this story unfold, they are getting their faces eaten putting this out into the world, thinking they were doing a good thing. Again, I don't know the process for them. I don't know who got the chance to see this before it went out live to the world. But if this was a thing that I would have seen, I would have raised my hand and be like, this ain't ready for prime time. Don't do it. Because you're going to just eat all of that bad energy for no reason when you were trying to do something good that may actually potentially have worth, but then you wind up getting it scrapped because the public perception of it is that it is bad and negative and not worth it. And then you wind up having this vicious cycle of, well, we thought we were doing diversity well. We thought we were putting something out in the world and everyone hated it. So we're not going to spend money. We're not going to spend resources towards it. We're going to scrap it. It winds up being that a lot in diversity and inclusion in spaces where if you put it in the wrong hands, and if you put it in the wrong hands and those wrong hands put it out to the public, it does this weird thing of what Austin said is like, we're doing well here. We saw that this wasn't a thing that worked. So why would we continue to do it and fund it? It winds up being a really bad, vicious cycle for all of that stuff. So I would say, you know, I applaud Activision and Blizzard for trying to do something. I just don't think this is it. And I just don't think that sharing it in this way is useful to anyone involved, both internally and externally. I just think they botched that in a real way. I don't think that that's the move for that. Last bit of news is a bit of a surprise for all of you at home. I am a big fan of the game Mother Gunship. Have been a big fan of that for a long time. It is this game, and I'll show the actual trailer here. Mother Gunship was this game in where you were getting these guns. It was kind of like Legos. You get these guns, you're fighting through this ship that is built out, and you're kind of putting in these weapon parts. You kind of go into the space where you're forging these weapons that have these kind of tinker toy spots on the weapons and these junctions and points where you're like, oh, I like this gun, but I want this gun to shoot faster. Let me plonk on a new attachment to it to make it shoot like that. Oh, I want this gun to shoot 6 bullets as opposed to 2 bullets. Let me plonk on this part of the weapon to make it shoot better, faster, better, you know, bigger, all of that stuff. The dope thing is that they're making a new version of that game that is going to be on that is going to be in VR. So it's going to do all of that cool stuff with your hands so that you were usually doing with a mouse and keys of connecting all those things. So now you get to do all that stuff in real time now. And do it in a VR space. So now you get to like look at your gun in 3D space and be like, oh, I want to turn it this way and put a weapon here. Oh, let me do this and put an attachment here. All of that cool stuff. I'm really excited for it. I'm really hyped for it. I love the first one from the folks over at Terrible Posture, who are the ones who made this game. We had them on an interview a couple of months ago. The announcement is that we are getting an attachment in the game from Spawn on Me. I am happy to present that we are getting our Spawn on Me Spawnies biscuit in the game, as they call them gun caps. And those gun caps add layers of, cool augments to those weapons. And they reached out to me and were like, hey, we love Spawn on Me. We want to do something cool with you all. I sent them over a version of our Chicago Biscuit Award, and they've put it into the game. It's going to be coming out really soon. It's called the Biscuit Trophy Gun Cap. So you attach this to your weapon, and it restores 1 health anytime you move into a new room. It's going to be super cool that they're going to share it. The biscuit on top of the weapon changes, it rotates. So it's going to be really cool to have that in VR in the game. They're going to put this in, and it's a cool little announcement to share with you all, that's going to be coming to Mother Gunship's new game called let me triple down. It'll show it at the end of this, actually, because I forget the actual full name of it, but it's Mother Gunship. I think it's Forge. Mother Gunship Forge is going to be the name of the game that we're going to be in. So this makes for our third, there it goes. Mother Gunship Forge is going to be coming out next month. This is our third game that we are in as Spawn on Me. Super wild to think about. I'm hyped for this. This is going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to be playing through it very, very soon. And there's going to be some flavor text in there that I haven't seen yet, but it may reference some conversations that you might have seen from all of us here at Spawn on Me, talking about our wonderful friends in the gaming industry who potentially can't cook food. So, IDARB was the first game that we were in. Then we had Hitman 3. We were in that game with a couple of missions that we did. And now we're going to be in Mother Gunship Forge as our third game that we're going to be a part of and in. I think it's awesome. I think it's super rad. I'm super psyched and happy that we're going to be able to do it. And it's going to be super cool. I'm hyped for that in a big way. So the biscuit trophy, the Spawnies are now in Mother Gunship Forge in a small way, but I'm really hyped for that. So we're going to come right back. We're going to take a quick break, and right after that, we're going to do a little bit of what we've been playing, and we're going to bring back an old segment that we haven't had a chance to talk about in a long time. We're going to go hang out at the cookout towards the end of the show. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. Hang out. Chill out for about a minute and a half. We're going to play some ads, and then right after that, we'll be right back after this. Much love to you all. Hang out, chill out for a second. We'll be right back after that.